At its best, law, and I would add to that the practice of law, should be equated with peace. The plane carrying your documents was impounded by British authorities. I was like, wait, what? Say that to me again? What did you just say? The most significant, the most impactful example of professional kindness that I have ever experienced. Best professional decision I ever made.
Really?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to EddieStyle channel. My name is Eddie Winner. Welcome to another episode of Interviewing the Law, where I interview legal experts about their lives and careers so that we can all learn more from their experiences and wisdom. Today's guest is no other than the Dean of the Law School here at the University of Illinois College of Law at Urbana-Champaign. You might think that his path of becoming the head of the law school was linear, maybe obvious, but in fact, it was nothing like that. His journey took him from studying literature and reading books to becoming a senior financial analyst on Wall Street at the height of the dot-com frenzy in one of the biggest institutions in the world. He later attended Yale Law School, he worked at Big Law, and as you will soon learn, his life took him into many other unexpected turns. He's nationally recognized expert on federal administrative law and federal judiciary, and over the years, he has educated and mentored countless of students, and over the years, for his excellent teachings, he has received more than 20 Teaching Excellence Awards. He has interesting hobbies, a fascinating background, and his philosophy on life is something that we could all learn from. Please welcome to this episode of Interviewing the Law, Dean Jamelle Sharpe.
Well, thank you, Eddie. Thank you very much. Given the quality of that introduction, I felt like I should even applaud. It was very generous of you to say all those things about me. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I mean, we have some good weather. It's nice to have it not be snowing in early November. And so I was able to walk over to the studio today and not, threaten my life with frostbite and hypothermia. So that's a positive thing for us. So it's good.
On this show, we have a little bit of a tradition,
Mhm.
and each guest gets their favorite beverage.
Yes.
And you ordered Coke Zero.
I did. Thank you. Or as I like to think of it, Coke Black Label.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I want to begin by asking a general question.
Sure.
You viewed law from different angles. You're an attorney,
Mhm.
educator,
Mhm.
now the dean.
Mhm.
You're in the trenches of law. What do you think the role of law is in our society?
Well, that's a great question. If I had to generalize it, at its best, law, and I would add to that the practice of law, should be equated with peace. The world's messy, right? People are messy. They have all sorts of interests. Those interests change over time. In order to ensure that all of us live lives that we can be proud of, that allow us to, achieve our aspirations, to protect those that we care about. We need to be able to coordinate our activities. We need to be able to have reasonable expectations as to how each of us will behave in a variety of situations, living in, many cases in close proximity to one another. And so the law, again, at its best, and law when practiced at its best, which is to say, ethically, honestly, openly, uh, allows us to have reasonable expectations of one another, allows us to coordinate our activities, allows us, perhaps most importantly, to manage our disagreements, to avert conflict that might be, destructive to us and to the communities that we're trying to build. And so, law and the legal practice allow us to live lives of relative comfort, of aspiration, law, and what many would refer to as the rule of law,
Mhm.
right? The understanding that the community sets the rules by which we all live and that we conform our conduct to those rules, right? All of those things allow us to advance human flourishing. Uh, it takes a lot of work. It is done imperfectly, but I think that it is one of the remarkable uh, achievements of humankind that we have thought about organizing ourselves around a commonly accepted set of rules by which we broadly agree to abide.
Before we talk more about it,
Yeah,
and it might sound random, but it's not. I know that you are into RPG games,
I am.
role-playing games.
I have less time for it now than I would probably like, but yes.
Right. And I couldn't but view your life
Hmm.
as sort of quest attainments
Sure.
and leveling up and building this giant tree skill.
Yeah.
For the audience, what
Mhm.
what are RPG games and what do you love about them?
Right. So, um, first, with respect to my interest in video games, just as a general matter, right? So, I am an old school gamer, right? So, I am a child of the '80s, and sorry for those of you playing at home. The '80s in many ways was the best decade, right? I mean, you can say what you
Really?
want
The
about the
80s?
the in many ways, not every way, but in many ways. So, I mean, look, we had,
In
you know,
video gaming?
we had in video gaming, right?
Really?
Yes, the reason that all of you enjoy these home consoles is because we had them and they were popularized in the 1980s, right? Starting with what I had, right, growing up in the Bronx, ColecoVision, right? And those, who are watching of a certain age, right? The nostalgia meter just went from 0 to 10 with me saying ColecoVision, and playing Qbert and Donkey Kong. Um, and obviously, the technology at that time wasn't sufficiently advanced to incorporate um, narrative in the way that we would currently experience it in video games. It was the nascent stages of the industry, right? So if you could get some pixels on a screen and have something jump up and down and then have X's over its eyes when you didn't do that properly and have it
Yeah,
keel over,
that's
that was
good.
probably sufficient and could, be a national bestseller. But, I've been playing those games, since I was really young. And so, at least with respect to the arcade movement and the home console movement, I've basically seen it from its beginning
Yeah.
all the way through now. And one of the wonderful things that happened right toward the end of the Nintendo Entertainment System era, right, and on into the Super Nintendo, and again, here's the nostalgia, the TurboGrafx 16, Sega Genesis, the Sega Saturn, I could go on, right? Once you started getting, more the console started getting more, um, sophisticated, they were less like the arcade games, which you pop in your quarter, right? You do a button mash as quickly as you can, and then you get to the end and, you fight Shredder if it's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or something else,
Yeah.
right? Once they got more memory, more processing speed, higher resolution, the game manufacturers could start incorporating long form stories, right, into the play.
Mhm.
And so, you started getting not only, the excitement and stimulation that you get from, like the platforming games or the side-scrolling games where you got to jump into this timing and things like that. Now you get to see the development of a story around a central character. And then once things got started getting more technologically sophisticated, gaming manufacturers started to incorporate branching in the
Mhm.
story,
Yeah.
where where the choices you make can influence the development of your character. So you can not only build your character so that they're different at the end than they were at the beginning. The narrative itself can change depending on the choices you make.
Right.
And I think that it's if done well, it's immersive. It is enthralling. It's fascinating, and I think it's ennobling in a very particular way. The underlying assumption of the worlds that are built in these games is through luck, kindness of the non-player characters often, through kindness through the NPCs, but mostly through one's own initiative and their hard work and their perseverance. And with the later games, right, depending on the path you take, their moral fortitude, right? Their goodness, if you will. Um, you can protect the people that you care about. You can do good for the society that you're in. And you can build strength that is used not only for yourself, all right, but for the good of all. And I think that is a, a profoundly ennobling assumption upon which to build an entire world. And so, the role playing game, is stepping into the shoes of somebody who, in many, though not all instances, you know, finds themselves in circumstances, finds themselves in a world that you'd never encounter in your day to day life, and being able to live, to make choices, and to persevere, right? Under circumstances that could be quite foreign to what your typical day to day would be. And you could see the product of your work, the cumulative effect of your efforts at the end of the game, and be told a story while you do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fantastic.
So why don't we go to
Hmm.
level 0?
Sure.
Your parents grew up in a small, gorgeous island, St. Vincent,
That's right.
with only 100,000 residents.
Hmm.
But you, on the other hand, grew up in the most vibrant city in the world, New York City.
Right. My parents came to the United States in the early 1970s. My father came first. My mother was studying to be a nurse in England. They both came from St. Vincent, different parts of St. Vincent. It's small, so even though there are different parts, they're not that far apart, right? But my dad was country and my mom was town, right?
Okay.
And so there was that difference.
Yeah.
But they both came from this small Caribbean island. My father directly to New York. My mother spent some time in England and then came over, and they were married. Um, you know, I think that the values that my parents learned in the Caribbean, are the ones that, to a large extent, guide a lot of my conduct, a lot of the choices that I have made, the way that I would approach, folks today. And there is an adventurousness, there's a courageousness, right? You have generations of a family that have only known one thing,
Yes.
right? My family, my parents in particular, did not come from anything any reasonable person would call means.
Hmm.
And, they left everything that they knew. They left it all behind because they hoped to be able not to be rich, not to be famous, but to just be a little bit better off than they could be if they stayed home.
Hmm.
And, they did this as, fairly young people, right? So, late teens, early 20s. And, there is a courage and an optimism uh, that informs a decision like that. And, I can only imagine what my parents heard about New York City
Yeah.
when they were in St. Vincent, right? Because again, right, we're talking about, not the New York City of today. We're talking about the New York City of, the early 1970s, right? And so if you have seen,
The moves.
yeah, so yeah, I mean, if you've seen any of the movies, right? If they, look up any movie that would, star, an Al Pacino or Harvey Keitel or Robert De Niro, right? A lot of these, right? Watch The French Connection, right? I mean, watch some of these movies to get kind of a flavor of what 1970s New York was like, and so I could only imagine what they heard about this city, and so there had to be some level of trepidation going there. But
Yeah.
as are many decisions in life, it's risk reward, right? Do I stay here and know what my future will look like, or do I gamble and leave? and hope for something better. And they took the latter course. And so, from them, I learned go where the opportunity is, right? Physical location isn't always the same thing as home, right? Home is, where the people that you care about are located, right?
Yeah.
And that could be anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, you know, make sure that you work hard, obviously. Make sure that you focus on family. Um, you know, they would not have put it this way. This is the way that I would put it, right? It's the C.S. Lewis formulation of the golden rule, right? Do as you would be done by. Treat people the way that you yourself would want to be, treated,
Yes.
and you know, be generous when you can. And so, they took many of those values from St. Vincent and brought them, to the United States with them. And I think that those values, sustained them, right? It wasn't always easy, right? As one could imagine. But they imparted those things to me, and made me, I think, an odd combination of idealistic but pragmatic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is like, so there are certain things that we hold on to that we believe in, causes that we advance, principles that govern our conduct, right? But you always do it in a way that is implementable, right? Make as much progress as you can, do as much good as you can, right? Help as many people as you can where you are, given the constraints of the situation. And so, the lessons that they learned there, they passed on to me and to my sister, and they've been Americanized to a large extent,
Yeah.
right? Me being born here, but they have sustained me and guided much of my conduct, throughout my life. Well, up until now, being the dean at the law school.
How was growing up in New York City in the Bronx in the 80s and 90s? How was it?
It was interesting. So I split my childhood. So essentially half of it was in the Bronx and, the urban environment that, you would come to expect. And then half of it was on Long Island. Now, many folks, will know what Long Island is, but, let me just give a little bit of what Long Island is for
Yeah.
the uninitiated, right? So Long Island is comprised of the two counties in New York State that are immediately east of Queens. And so, that's Nassau County and Suffolk County. And, they're very close to, New York City. Like I said, it's like Nassau is immediately east of Queens, right? One of the five boroughs. But it is a very densely populated suburb. And so, uh, in many ways, right, the physical surroundings were very different than where I grew up in the Bronx, which was all concrete and, tall buildings and, very densely populated. But, one of the things that was very similar about it, and one of the things that, I appreciated even when I was young, and I certainly appreciate now, was how diverse both the Bronx and the town I lived in, Brentwood in Suffolk County, were and remain. Um, Very international. It's a working class where we lived was a working class neighborhood with a lot of first generation immigrants, like my parents. But like I said, there are folks from Eastern Europe, right? There are folks from the Caribbean and Latin America who lived in our neighborhood, and we're all just trying to figure out what this America thing was about, and you know, uh, you know, good work for a good wage,
Hmm.
right? And so they're like real working class, values there, right? That I observed in my parents and I observed right in our neighbors and my classmates' parents. When we moved out to Long Island, we moved out there when I was 8 years old. Um, you know, Again, it's a suburb, it's a densely populated suburb, but it's a suburb. But to a large extent, like, the demographics were really similar now that I think
Mm.
about it, right? And so you had a lot of folks, you had some folks whose families had been there for generations, right? But a lot of the folks were, first generation immigrants, right? Like my parents, right? There were a lot of folks from um, um, Latin America. There are a lot of folks from the Caribbean, particularly Haiti, who live in our neighborhood. So, my friend group growing up looked like the United Nations. I mean,
Mhm.
right? And that was just the default, right? We had, folks from everywhere, and, we all went to school together. We all played together. We got to be really close friends. And, growing up in that environment, right, and carrying with me the values that my parents, imparted to me, right? You treat everybody well,
Mhm.
right? You know, where they come from shouldn't matter to you.
You see the humanity in them.
You do, right? Take it, somebody is from someplace else, take it as an opportunity to learn a little bit about something that you don't see every day,
Yes.
right? But treat people with respect, right? Um, and again, right, in Brentwood, it was also a working class, right, middle class neighborhood, right? That's what it was. And so, to a large extent, the formative values that I have are really, those of like, the working class, I was lucky, I was able to, go on to college and, do some things after that. You know, first generation in my family to do that, right? Me and my cousins, right? So there are several of us, who have, gone on to college or later. Um, and for all of us, it's because our parents instilled in us the value of having an education, right? It's like, it's a typical West Indian household thing. They say, basically, you have one job. Your one job is school,
Yeah.
right? So do your one job, right? And make sure you do it well,
Yeah.
right? And so, that was definitely the case in my household. Let me
Mhm.
tell you, and so, that's kind of carried me forward. But yeah, those experiences in the Bronx and on Long Island, you could take the man out of New York. You can't take New York out the man, I guess.
Right. So you grew up, you went to NYU,
I did. Yeah,
you studied literature, you graduated magna cum laude
yeah,
with honors, with
yeah,
many awards.
yeah.
And what made you choose to study literature? And
Mhm.
also, you live downtown New York City. It's not Long Island,
No,
it's not the Bronx,
no.
so many distractions. What made you take school so seriously being so young?
Starting with NYU, I will admit, right, I wasn't that thoughtful in my college selection process. But man, did I get lucky. So, like many of my high school classmates, right, at least those who were, going to go to college, right, which was not the majority by any stretch of the folks with whom I graduated. But among those who thought college was the next option, right, they put a lot of work into, vetting and visiting and doing I
Mhm.
didn't do any of that. So, I basically, when I knew that the deadlines were coming to apply to college, I basically, filled out the applications that I had at home, right? I went to my guidance counselor, I said, "What college applications do you have?" She's like, "Well, I got these left." I was like, "Okay, great." Right? And, I filled them out. I didn't visit, like, any of the schools before I applied,
Yeah.
right? This was kind of a foreign concept. Again, right, it's like, my parents, um, you know, all of this stuff was completely foreign to them, right? Um, and so we at the time, we didn't know enough to say, "Okay, we should populate a list. We should look at the admissions criteria. We should start planning when we're gonna go visit them, and here are the people that we should talk to when we
All the procedure.
all the procedure." Yeah, the procedure was, okay, there's a blank application, so
Right.
let me fill it out in pen, right? I remember, just to go, lack of, my own sophistication in approaching the college admissions process, I, uh, I asked my 10th grade social studies teacher for a recommendation,
Mhm.
Mr. McLaughlin, and I loved Mr. McLaughlin, he was great. And I guess maybe he wasn't too sophisticated
Okay.
because he asked me, uh, when I asked him for the recommendation, he said, "Yeah, of course, I'd be happy to write it for you. Is it okay if I just write it with a pen and paper because my typing is not so great?" And I said, "Yeah, shoot, it's fine." So he hand wrote my recommendation for college, right?
You had one copy of it.
Like I went
Not
copy,
lose
right?
it.
At least or my guidance counselor was able to like photocopy, right? But it wasn't getting typed, let me tell you. And so but it was heartfelt.
Yeah.
So I assume the content was good. It was a little hard to read. Um, but so that was the level of sophistication that with which I approached this.
Okay.
And like I said, I mean, boy, did I get lucky. You know, uh, I didn't know, other than that NYU was a good school, I didn't know anything about it because, like I said, I didn't visit it. And so the first time that I actually went there that I can recall is when I moved into my dormitory.
Mhm.
Right, that was basically, I might have gone there to do some registration stuff before that, but I didn't spend any real time there. I had never been to Greenwich Village before
Really?
then. No, I'd never even been in that part of Manhattan before,
Mhm.
right? Not that I can recall anyway. Um, and so, the thing that I found about it, the people were just fascinating, right? They're the everyday people walking around because it's an open campus, right? So
Yes.
it's raw New York,
Yeah.
right?
Oh.
That you're surrounded by,
Uh-huh.
right? So around Washington Square Park, and one of the people that I met early on in my college career was a guy by the name of Bill Altriest, and Bill was significantly older than the rest of us. And the reason that Bill was significantly older than the rest of us was he had gone to NYU and then kind of life intervened, and then he had stopped going,
Okay.
and he was selling books like on the street corner. And I don't remember how long he was doing that. It might have been like a decade. That's just what he did, right? Right? And then he decided that he wanted to go back and finish his degree, right? But and he and I took many, many classes together with another, one of my classmates, Jason Naji, and we took a lot of classes together in the literature department. It was just meeting people like that,
Randomness. The
just the
randomness of
pure randomness.
Yeah.
My one of my very best friends, he was my roommate my junior year, his senior year, right? He's now a Catholic priest.
Really?
Yes,
Your former roommate is now
yes,
a Catholic
he's
priest?
now a Catholic priest. So we started off. This is Father Abraham Feliciano, right? And so he started off. So again, just interesting people, right? When he was in before he went to NYU, he had dabbled in acting, so he was in some episodes of The Cosby Show,
Okay.
and then he came to NYU to be pre-med,
Okay.
did well academically, but decided not to do that. Then he was a philosophy major, and then he decided to go into the priesthood.
Whoa.
And so these are the kinds of people, right, that I was surrounded by, right? And it was just incredible. It was great. And then, the study of literature itself, I didn't go to college frankly knowing what I wanted to study, right? And I enjoyed, literature in high school, but I hadn't made any decisions. I remember I took a class, literary interpretation, and I'm trying to recall. I think it might have been spring of my freshman year. And the professor there complimented me on the quality of my work, and she asked me, "Would you like to consider being a major and being in the honors program?" Because at the time, you had to be invited by a faculty member to be in the honors program, right?
Mm.
They had to, I don't know what the process was behind the scenes, but you had to be sponsored or invited by a faculty member. And so she invited me and asked me if I wanted to do that, right? I loved her class. It was fascinating, right? The depth of the analysis, the number of disciplines that could be brought to bear on a text, right? The surprising ways that the meaning of text could signify, depending on the perspective, that you brought to it, right? Really learning that, any work of artistry, once it's completed, belongs to the world and not to the author,
Hmm.
right? And so, you bring your own experiences, for good or bad, right, to a text. It enriches you, right? You learn that, especially when something resonates with you, that you're not alone, right? And so it can, literature on the one hand can teach you that, there are folks who are thoughtful, soulful, intelligent across time who could teach you something about your circumstances today and resonate with you so that the loneliness, especially in difficult times, right, can be alleviated for a time that the text stays with you, right? But it also brings you inside the life of another person, right? So this goes back to the theme. This is part of the reason why I like RPGs as much as I do. It shows you a perspective that you would never have generated on your own, and it teaches you a different way to look at the world and to appreciate it, right?
Yeah.
And that's a true gift, right? To reframe the world and you live in, right, regenerates the world for you,
Right.
right? And so that was at the core of the study of literature, and I couldn't get enough of it. It was revelatory, it was humanizing, um, you know, uh, it was analytically rigorous. I mean, it was but, my my faculty members, right, my professors were absolutely incredible. I had occasion actually to connect with, one of them, just a few months ago. I've not spoken to him since I graduated. Uh, and, he was the TA. He was a PhD student at the time. And this was from my, introductory British literature class. And, I was glad because he reached out to me, on LinkedIn, because I guess he
Okay.
recognized me, and he was just like, "Well, you've come a long way since I was chiding you in my office for not having read the Iliad." Right? It's like you've come quite a distance. And I said to him, and I meant it when I said it. It's like, his name was Daniel Duragusker. I said, Daniel, you know, perhaps more than anybody else, you shaped my intellectual journey, right? It's like you took me seriously. And by taking me seriously, you demanded that I do well. You didn't take mediocre work from me. It's like you refused to. And, that having somebody place those expectations on me made me believe that that's what I should be doing, right? That's the level of achievement that I should have, right? And if I do anything else, it's because I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, right? He set that for me. And he probably never realized it, but I was glad because we reconnected, right, all these decades later. That I was glad to be able to tell him, right, that he did that for me. And so, studying literature, was genuinely transformative. I enjoyed it tremendously, and I got to meet, really, really wonderful people. Um, going to NYU was just, at that time in my life, it was the best thing that could have happened for me.
Dean Sharp, I really like the fact that you always give credit to
Mhm,
people for transforming you. I really appreciate your honesty. Just a side remark and your
mhm,
humbleness of giving credit
mhm,
to people.
mhm.
I really appreciate that. From studying novels, you got a job at one of the biggest institutions in the world, financial institutions, and you worked as a financial analyst. How did that transition occur?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You're saying that it isn't we're not considering that a natural transition? It's like, you study,
No, that's
right? You go
that's
from
like a
studying,
quest.
yeah, yeah,
You
right.
just like jumped into a different universe.
That's right.
Wall Street.
Yeah, yeah, how does that happen? And so, again, it's making sure, that you are open to adventure, um, having really good mentors, and having it just enough wisdom to take their advice. right? And so, there was an academic counselor, basically, and, her name, is, Marie Laguerre-Lewis, and, she and I had gotten to know each other while I was a student there, and, she learned of an opportunity, at Morgan Stanley, so this was before they merged with Dean Witter. They were trying to diversify, their ranks, and so, there was a scholarship program for, high achieving, students in certain demographic groups, African American, Latino, women, right, other things. And she said, it's like, "You should take a look at this." And I'm like,
Mm.
"Well, what do I it's like finance, right?" It's like, I know how to spell finance, right? It's like, I can do that, but, this is not something to which I had given any, right, serious thought. But she said, it's like, "Look, you gotta be open-minded about things, right? You don't know where life will take you." It's like, "What's the harm?" Right? Go and talk to these folks, see what they have to say. Yeah, it's totally different from the things that you're thinking about. I mean, even at that time, I was thinking about law, right? I
Yes.
mean, I loved literature, but I was thinking about, how could I marry my love of text and textual analysis,
Mhm.
with making a difference in people's lives, right? And, law was the most obvious combination of those two things. I was also considering, doing a PhD in literature.
Mhm.
And, if you're more interested in that, I could tell you some stories about that. But obviously I decided not to go ahead and do that. But she said, it's like, look, this is just something different. So, I applied, right? I had taken quantitative classes, and so I had done well in those, right? So, it's a bank. And so they gotta be confident you know how to count, right? So that box being checked, so they interviewed me and I was able to get the scholarship. And so that allowed me to take what I now think of as a very um beneficial detour, in life. And beneficial, financially to some extent, but that's dwarfed, by, the quality of the experience, that Morgan Stanley and the department within the investment bank of which I was a part, was able to give me. It was, you know, it was brutally hard.
I can
Um,
only imagine.
oh boy. Working, 100 hours a week, for effectively, 3 years straight. And something that, I did not train for,
Mhm.
as an undergraduate. And so, not yeah, in a work environment that was quite different from anything that I had previously been exposed to. Like I said, it's like, I come from, an immigrant background. I come from a first generation background, right? And, a lot of, the work life, you work hard, but a lot of it is you clock in, you clock out,
Right.
you do your job in between. But when you're home, you're home. This was different, right? This was, you know, you come in at, 8 and you leave at 8 AM. Right? So it was a little different now, right? I remember, the, I remember, shortly after I had started there and, I had gotten some inkling that it would be like this, but it's different when you're actually living it. I mean, it's just not, right? Knowing the path and walking the path, right? They're two different things. So I remember it's like, I'm there, it's a few months and, it's about 6 PM. My mom calls me on the phone, right? And, I had been there for I don't know how many hours, right? I'd been there late the night before. I got back, got, maybe 3 or 4 hours sleep, went back to work. So now 6 PM. All right. So it's around dinner time or whatever for normal people. And,
Yeah.
and she's just saying to me, she's like, well, you sound tired. It's like, well, yeah, it's been a rough week. And, so I'm a little, I'm kind of working on fumes. And so she says to me, right, with sweet innocence, she says, well, why don't you just go home? It's 6 o'clock.
Oh.
Right. And so I pause. I say, Mom, they don't do that here. What don't they do? It's like, go home. They don't do that here. Because everybody was still at work. Everyone, literally everyone was still there. And they were still going to be there for until the wee hours of the morning. Because like you had mentioned, right, I got there right at the start of the tech IPO boom.
Yeah.
That's when I was there. Right? And the department, the first 2 years I was there, the department I was a part of, that's the one that did the IPOs for the banks, right? The initial public offering. So,
Yes.
all of the Amazon and Google and all of these companies were going public, right? And Morgan Stanley was either what we call the book runner, right? The lead bank, right? Or otherwise involved in those issuances, right? And then there were a whole bunch of other companies, right, that were going public at the time. It was an unprecedented time for public offerings in the United States and in the world. It had never been a higher volume, as far as I'm aware. It was never been a higher volume. And that's when I got there,
Yes.
right? And so, it was kind of, we're leanly staffed. You get people who of high intelligence, but higher stamina, right? Right? That was a more important criterion, right, than just being smart.
Yeah.
Right? Can you survive and function at a relatively high level? Because if you didn't, Merrill Lynch would. If you didn't, Goldman Sachs would, right? They'd be more than happy to take that call, right, when you're asleep, right?
It's
Um,
3 a.m.
It is when it's 3 a.m., right? And so, the folks who were more senior to me and to my analyst cohort, they understood this because they had been around for a while. And so they understood, and it's only on reflection that I get this, right? I didn't understand it when I was there, but I get it now, right? They hadn't seen anything like this. They knew this was unusual. So they knew you got to make hay when the sun is shining, right? And the sun is shining brighter right now than it ever has been, right? This is not promised tomorrow, right? So we got to get at it right now,
Yes.
right? And get at all of it, right? And we tried to get all of it,
Yeah,
right?
the
Let
big
me look at
clients.
yes. And so, it was drinking from a fire hose, marathon at a sprint's pace, whatever metaphor you want to put on it, right, is what it was. And so, coming from the literature background, having that opportunity through this scholarship program, right, to view that world, it was difficult, and I am immensely grateful that I was able to do it. And some of the folks that I worked with, who or worked with in my department, right? I think now one of them is Ted Pick. I think that he is the head of Morgan Stanley now. He was just an associate then. Ruth Porat, who I think is a high level person at Google now. She sat across from me,
Hmm.
right? Right across from me, right? And so, all these folks who have gone on to have amazing careers, right? We all were in that place at that time in the investment bank, doing these IPOs in the late 1990s, right? So, don't get me wrong. I wouldn't want to go back to investment banking. That's just not something, right? I'm good, right? The 3 years, I'm good, right? That's good. But it taught me so much, and I got to work with such amazing people that I'm genuinely grateful, right, to have had that opportunity. So
Were there moments where you worked so hard, you just said, "What am I doing? Is this the life I want?"
yeah,
Kind of got depressed, and how
yeah.
did you deal with that? Were there any moments like this?
Oh, there were. I mean, and optimism I found is a learned behavior. So I had stamina when I was younger, right? So this is when I was, in my early to mid 20s. Optimism was a little bit more sporadic, but you know, there were a couple of things, right? One was, with the analysts, we were all in it together.
Yeah.
It's like, there was the analysts that I worked with who were like, a year senior to me, and the names now fled back to me, right? It's like, Elisa Kwan and Charmaine Abad, that was her maiden name, and Somya Prasad, and a lot of the people that I worked with, they carried us through because they had just gone through this the year before, right? And so part of the culture there was once you learn how to do something, you teach the people behind you how to do it at a high level. And so not only were they helping us along to get up to speed, right? They were helping us, in our morale, right? You can do this. I'm going to help you. You're going to get through this. You're going to be good. No, I'm not going to let you not do this well, right? It's like if you're here, then you have the capability. So we're going to make sure that you realize that capability. That was really a lot of the culture, right? And I had really good, bosses there too, who believed in us and insisted on excellence. And again, setting that expectation and giving people the support to meet that expectation, even when the expectations themselves are absurd. I mean, they're genuinely absurd, right? Uh, y- you know, that's what helped carry many of us through. And yeah, there were times when, you've worked 110 hours that week and, you would love a reprieve, but you're coming up on Sunday and you're going to be in the office at 9 a.m. and you're not going to leave until it's dark,
Hmm.
right? There were a lot of those days. But, again, having, kind of a little bit of gallows humor, a little bit of
Right,
self-deprecation,
right.
right? And having a whole lot of other people in the trenches with you,
Yeah,
right? That I don't know that I could have survived without those
yeah.
folks, right? It was, and so, obviously I can look back on it and laugh now, but man, it wasn't funny then.
Mm. And again, you're giving credits for your success to other people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I give it where it's, each, I give it where it's due. And no, I could not have done all of that on my own. And I think I don't view it as diminishing myself in any
No, not at
way,
all.
right? To say, you know, you know, Eddie Malloy helped carry
I
me
thought you were
through.
about to say Eddie Winner
Yeah,
for a
well, Eddie Winter for giving me the opportunity to reflect.
second.
Eddie Malloy was an analyst who was a year behind me, right? And as he would refer to himself, he was freakishly tall,
Mm,
and he was a great guy. And so he and I worked on a lot of deals together and spent a lot of late nights together while I was at the bank. But it's just having people who are there with you, who are encouraging you, right? Who are helping you get smarter, helping you get better, right? That's
yes.
kind of how, I think that's how we prosper, individually and collectively, right? So, that's a lot of like the mindset that I like to bring, particularly to the duties that I have now. So,
Well, after that, you attended one of the best law schools in the world.
yeah,
Obviously, not as good as the University of Illinois College of Law,
no,
but you went,
no, no,
but you went to Yale, and you said
yeah,
that you had some thoughts to doing PhD in literature.
yeah, I did.
What made you choose one over the other?
So, you know, um, I I remember, uh, you know, sitting in my dorm room, senior year and kind of really thinking about, what I was going to do. At that point, I already knew that I was going to go to the investment bank, right? So, by the time I'm in senior year, I already know what my plans are immediately after graduation. Mostly because I believed, um, and some distance in years from that decision, I think have only confirmed that I probably was right. That I needed to grow up a little bit. I needed to learn how to support myself. And I felt like I needed to do something that was hard and scary for me. I needed to prove to myself that I could do that. And so going to the investment bank gave me that opportunity. Um, and so then the question was, well, what do I do after I'm done with that? Right. So, 2 or 3 years, however long it took, what do I do next? I thought a lot about this. I talked to, my professors, My professors were telling me, look, we think that you have some, chops here. I know folks at the Yale PhD program. I know folks at the Harvard PhD program. I'll be your recommender, but then I can also like call some people, right? They're not the only great programs, but we think that you would be competitive, right, if you applied for these things. Um, but ultimately, as much as I loved the study of it, like I had mentioned earlier, um, I felt like I wanted to have um, more of a societal impact
Hmm.
than literature as vocation would allow me, right? I wasn't going to be a novelist. That's another way to have a profound impact. I mean, the novelists, the writers that I read in undergrad had a profound impact on me, right? So I knew that there, at least on that side of it, what the potential was. But that wouldn't be if were I to pursue that, that wouldn't have been my path. And so, while I loved my professors and I was deeply grateful to them, I felt like I wanted to have a different interaction with the world. And I remember, sitting in the office of, one of my professors, and he himself, he was a wonderful professor, right? But he's one of these guys who like lived his theory. He was great. And we're sitting in his office, and he was a Yale PhD, right? Um, and he's, we're talking about Yale's program and, stuff like that. And then I said, well, I think that I'll probably go to law school. So he just looks at me and he says, I thought about going to law school. Then I threw up. I came to my senses and I applied to the PhD program. And so I said, thank you for your guidance. Right?
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, Sensei. And so, you know, uh, I didn't abandon, obviously, given what I do now, I didn't completely abandon, my love for the academic side of, of professionalism. And so, again, I had the opportunity to go to, you know, one of, if not the most academically oriented
Yes.
law schools
Yes.
in the country. And, you know, um, one of the most surprising things about the place were my classmates,
Okay.
right? Because you have folks who are, you have folks that they are in many ways, if we're talking about traditional credentialing and accomplishment, right? It's another thing. It's like, being older now, I am wiser and I understand, um, you know, there are so many ways to be exceptional. There are so many ways to be valuable, and they can't all be captured in an application process. Right? So, at the time, I had a minimal understanding of that, right? But I've been fortunate to, have seen enough, learned enough, gotten to know enough people, to be a smarter person than I was in my mid-20s. But, you know, with respect to traditional credentialing, right? These are some of the most accomplished people that you will encounter anywhere on earth,
That's true.
right? Were my classmates. And so, it was incredible to be around them, but the thing that struck me is how nice they were.
Hmm.
They're like nice people.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they're just like, you know, normal, humble.
Really?
Yes.
That comes to contrast to some stories I heard about
Uh-huh.
Harvard in the 90s, for example, from Dr. Mazzoni, that it was very competitive. People
Yeah,
elbowing each other left and right, were
yeah,
stealing books from the library so you
yeah,
cannot do the readings.
yeah,
But it
yeah,
wasn't like that. Well, you were there in the early 2000s, but it
yeah.
was not like that.
Um, Anywhere you go, you're gonna have people who are sorta like that. I admit I don't know of any
You
stories
see
of
the
people.
good in people.
We
That's also a part of it.
maybe, but I could see plenty of bad too. Right, right. It's like I was born in the Bronx. I can see
Yeah,
I
okay.
need to have acquired that
Right.
skill, right? So, but as for a lot of those stories that you hear, about some of the other law schools. right? I myself didn't see that. Certainly not with
Really?
my classmates.
Happy to hear that.
Oh no, it was really great. You had folks who were incredibly ambitious, right? And some of them, were, the social skills I hope have developed since we have been classmates. But that is a distinct minority, right? The majority of them are just the nicest people, right? And you know, they would not be the ones to tell you all they have accomplished,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
They're just not gonna do it. Now, there are other folks who, like, signed, their memoirs, which had already been published by the time they got there, signed them for me, right? And handed me hard copies of them and,
Which
you
is
know
I sign it for you.
yeah, yeah, for you, I was like, I thought you might want this. Here's a signed copy of my autobiography, right? So there was that, right? There was certainly some of that. But even those people, right, in their own way, right, were really nice people, right? And so that was probably the most surprising thing
Hmm,
to me, about the place.
yeah.
Um, because I had read before I started law school. So, I had finished at the investment bank and I basically had the summer off. A buddy of mine and buddy he was going into his second year at Harvard Law School. He and I had met, years before in an internship program with city government in New York City. That's a whole other thing, right? We worked for the Rudy Giuliani administration. That's a whole other thing if you're ever interested. If you're
Interesting.
ever interested in that,
Oh my God,
that's
there's
a
so
whole
much to talk
yeah,
about.
that's another thing. We did that for a summer. But he was a 2L at Harvard. And we took a trip out to Los Angeles, my first time ever out in LA, and there were a whole bunch of adventures there that I'm not gonna go into. Um, but you know, I had read on his advice, I had read 1L, the novel 1L, which is about Harvard in the 1970s, right? And
Oh,
so whatever Professor Mazzotti said, that would have been, I think, Harvard light as to
oh,
compared to what the 1970s were like. So that's what I was expecting when I went to Yale. I was expecting something similar to that,
but you
and
still went there.
I was already locked in. I'd already put in my deposit, so I was just like,
Oh,
"Oh,
okay.
all right, well, now I gotta go," right? Right, I'd broken my lease, right, in Jersey City, which is where I was living, and so, yeah, it's like the die was cast, man.
Yeah.
I was on my way. And so, it wasn't like that, like, at all because my classmates weren't like that. Um, and so, it was really, you know, it was enlightening in so many ways because at the investment bank, I had folks who were incredibly accomplished and
Mhm.
hard charging and stuff, and these folks were just as accomplished, but they were just at a different speed of
Yeah.
life, right? And like I said, many of them were quite humble and they were ambitious and they were there to take care of their business. But they didn't think that needed to come at the expense of anybody else that they were sitting in the room with.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
that was really the thing that, impressed me, about them. So,
What is your favorite memory from Yale Law School?
oh, it's meeting my wife, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, and, I don't know that I've even ever told her this, right? But I remember seeing her, it was her birthday and she was in the cafeteria and she had dressed up for her birthday.
Uh-huh.
Right? And I just remember just kind of looking at her and being like, there's somebody I need to get to know better.
Yeah.
Right? And then the rest is history. So, obviously that's the best that's the best memory I have. Because
That's awesome.
as you can imagine, right, her, tolerating me for the last 20 years has improved my quality of life immeasurably. But there were some really obviously, life altering wonderful things. And then there were some other things, right?
Mhm.
So for example, right, I was in constitutional law in my first year when Bush v. Gore was decided.
Mhm.
I was in law school when 9/11 happened,
Right.
right? And I remember, when the towers were coming down, there were folks there, upperclassmen, not in my year, right? But second and third year students. One of them, I don't remember whether she was a second or third-year student, I remember hearing her say, "Oh my god, my husband is in that building."
Really?
Yes. Right, so many of
Oh.
us, knew people in Manhattan, several of us, I didn't, but several of us knew people who were in the towers the day that this happened, right? And so that's a really dark chapter. I remember,
Mhm.
I mean, I can smile about it now, but, um, spring semester of my 3rd year, um, around about finals, right? So many of us are getting ready to graduate, we're preparing for our final exams. Somebody put a bomb in our student lounge and blew it up.
Really?
Yeah. You could go and look this up. I mean, you could go and find the news stories about it, right? Bomb at Yale Law School. Somebody blew up our student lounge, right?
Were
Uh,
there
eh,
any
eh,
injuries?
there were no injuries. They never found the person who did it, right? And the theory among the law students, anyway, the theory among the law students was that it was maybe, right, wild speculation, right? But maybe it was an undergraduate student who wasn't admitted,
Mm,
and, part of what informed that was, the bomb, if I recall correctly, was detonated on a Saturday morning. And so somebody, probably had some understanding of how many people would be in the building, right, at that particular point in the semester, and didn't wanna
mm,
do any damage to people,
mhm,
but just wanted to do damage to the physical structure.
mhm.
And so, many of us had, the FBI come to our apartments,
Wow.
right, to interview us. We had news crews that were, on the street in front of the law school doing news stories because it was thought at the time that this was a terrorist attack.
Right.
You could imagine that, somebody might think that Yale is an attractive target. And so, especially, it's not that long after 9/11. And so,
Right.
right. So there was a lot going. So there were really terrific things like, meeting my classmates for the first time, having conversations around, the most important issues of law of the day, meeting my wife, and then there are other things, like I said, it's like, it was a really interesting time to be a law student there, right, to say the least.
So Dean Sharp, after Yale Law School,
Mhm.
you returned to New York. You work at Kravitz.
Yep.
You worked at Big Finance. Now you're
Mhm.
in Big Law. How is this experience different?
Yeah, so, that was also, a really enriching, experience, very smart people, very hardworking people. Admittedly, I didn't work quite as hard as I did, when I was at Morgan Stanley, um, but I was more than fully employed, I'll put it that way. Um, I again, it's in many instances, it's better to be lucky than smart. So, I had summered there during law school, and they obviously gave me an offer, and I returned after law school. Uh, and I got assigned to, a partner in litigation, by the name of Tom Rafferty. And the experience that he gave his associates was very different than the experience that litigation associates at other law firms typically get, and even to a large extent, the associates at Cravath itself. Rafferty's view was basically, right, go out and make me money, right? That was kind of what it comes down to,
Yeah.
right? He was an exceptionally bright lawyer, extremely hardworking, and really believed if you're going to come and be a litigation attorney, go litigate.
Yes.
Right, and so don't he didn't require his folks to do 5 years of document review. That's just not what.
Mm.
So I worked with him. Um, I worked with another excellent attorney, Rowan Wilson, who is now, the Chief Justice on the New York, Court of Appeals, right? The highest court in New York, right?
Wow.
He was a longtime partner at Cravath, right? And Rowan was a great guy, like Rafferty, a brilliant attorney. And, we were told, get up to speed quickly and represent clients. And so, you know, one of the first things that I did after I got sworn in, right? This is the second department in New York where, I passed the bar. I got sworn in, and maybe it was only a week, maybe it only seems like a week, but very shortly after I got sworn in, the first thing that I did as an official lawyer, Rafferty and, another senior associate that he worked with, Kenneth Lee, sent me to London by myself to take 2 depositions across from a partner, right, who was like 25 or 30 years into the practice,
Okay.
um, and take 2 depositions of, British nationals, 2 different
Oh,
depositions. So
easy.
that was within, yeah, easy stuff, right? And so, that was within, I think, like, if it might have been within the first week that I was admitted to practice, um, or shortly thereafter. Now, obviously, right, this isn't something that you wake up on Monday and then you go take depositions in a foreign country on Friday, right?
Right.
So that had been the plan, and we were preparing for it because they're foreign nationals. They're not subject to U.S. process, certainly not New York process. So we had to get letters rogatory, which would give us official governmental permission to depose their citizens, and like all we had to do all of that stuff, right? But I had to go over there by myself. Right? No second chair, no senior associate, no partner, just me,
Oh my
right?
God.
And so, interesting, just very quickly, interesting story about that, right? So as you can imagine, right, I am as nervous as you wouldn't believe. And so I spend all of my time, hours and hours and hours preparing for this deposition, right? Making sure I know the records, making sure I know the questions, the theories of the case, tying them all together, right? Having, 2 and 3 backup questions depending on where the
Mhm.
conversation go, all this stuff. But you know what I didn't do? I didn't look for my passport. So
Hmm.
my flight leaves for Heathrow, right? Flying out of JFK. The time my wife and I are living in Harlem, right? So I come home and it's like midnight, right? And I said, okay, look, here's what I'm going to do. I got it. My flight's going to leave at like, I think it was like 6:30 a.m. or 7 a.m. So I'm going to catch a couple of hours of sleep, right? And then, I'm going to call the car service, have them pick me up, take me to the airport. No sooner than I lay my head down, that my eyes pop open and I realize I have not seen my passport in months,
Hmm.
and we have moved
Mm.
since the last time I saw it. I had no now we had, you know, the partner from another law firm who had already traveled to London. We had the witnesses in the deposition who had already cleared their schedules for the day
Yes.
so that we could go, the following day and have these depositions.
Yes.
So people had already significantly altered plans in anticipation of me deposing these people. And so I realized I don't know where my passport is.
I could feel your anxiety
Oh my gosh.
echoing.
Oh my gosh. And so, I wake Nicola up and I say, I don't know where my passport is. Right. And, she says something along the lines of, oh crap. And so, this is now, we're like, like I said, my flight is in a few hours. And so we are tearing the condo apart, looking for this passport because we hadn't seen it. Um, I think that at that point, I'm trying to remember the last time that we had seen it. I couldn't even remember. Right? So I didn't even know with our move that I had brought it with me. I had no idea where it was. And so we're scouring the apartment, we're tearing it about, and I find a passport. And I'm like, okay, I look at it, it's expired.
No way.
Right?
Oh my God, that's
So it
horrible.
was horrible, right? And so now I'm thinking, right, I am gonna have to call the partner, senior associate, the partner at the other law firm who is already in London and tell them that I can't make it and we have to cancel. And the reason I have to give them is because I was an idiot and didn't think about where my passport was. And then, you know, Nicola's like, we talk about, well, do you think they'd let me travel on an expired passport? That conversation lasted about 3 seconds. No, right? And so, she said, okay, well, let's just keep looking because this was not your last passport. I know it wasn't. She finds the passport at the bottom of the closet in a Yale Law School bag
Whoa.
that we just happened to not have thrown away in our move. Okay.
God.
So she finds the passport just in time for me to get in the car and get to the airport and make my flight.
I'm so happy
Right.
that you relieved me from all the anxiety of this stuff.
Yeah. There's more. So,
Oh,
so, I have all my documents in my boxes and I bring them with me on the plane. And, I'm working the whole time. I'm, revising everything, refining what I'm going to do. And, I get off the plane, I go to the hotel, right? Everything is good. Next morning, I go into Cravat's London office, which is where we're going to be having the deposition. Right? There's a nice, young lady, at the receptionist desk. I say, "Hey, I'm Jamelle from the New York office." She's like, "Well, welcome, Mr. Sharp. We've been expecting you. We set you up in the conference room here." And I say, "Okay, great. So, I got a few hours before we get this thing started. So, I assume that my stuff is in there and my boxes are in there." And she said, "What boxes?" I said, "Well, the boxes with all my documents for the deposition."
mm-hmm.
She's like, "We've never seen any boxes. We didn't get any boxes for you." It's like, "But all my documents are in there, right?" It's like, "I can't do my deposition without my documents." He's just like, "We haven't received anything." So I'm like, "What?" I had copies, but I had written on all of them because I was preparing while I was on the plane.
Who was supposed to bring them?
Well, here's the thing. They were, I had, sent them over, I think it was by, Federal Express, and they were
Oh,
supposed to deliver them, right, in advance, and they were supposed to deliver them to the office in time for me to do. And so, she automatically goes into action mode, right? And, I'm sitting there just kind of like, what is happening, right? She comes into the conference room and she says, "Well, Mr. Sharp, I have some information." I was like, "What's the information?" "You won't believe this." It's like, "The plane carrying your documents was impounded by British authorities." I was like, "Wait, what? Say that to me again? What did you just say?" She's like, "The whole plane got impounded, that's the word she used, and she said, "No, none of the cargo is coming off of the plane, and they don't expect that it will for about a week." Right? And so I'm like, like, what in the world? Why is this happening? It's like, what, like, I mean, it's like somebody really doesn't want me here, right? They really don't want me doing this to me. I'm cursed. Right? And so, there's a good lesson to be learned here. One of which is bring your documents with you on the plane and don't send them in advance. Right? Right. And so at least enough a clean copy to make photocopies if you need to do that. Right. So that's lesson number one. Right. But lesson number two. So the partner from the other firm, he comes. He shows up and I pull him aside and I say, "John, let me tell you what's going on." Right. Now, again, right, he's a hard charging New York lawyer, right? You know, decades into the business, right? So one might see advantage here, right?
yeah.
Right? But here's what he does, right? He listens to what I said. And he's like, "Okay, look, I think I know what documents you need. Take mine, make copies. Take mine, get copies. Let's do this."
Mm,
You know, that taught me that even when you're in an adversarial posture, even when you could gain significant strategic advantage, right? Because that would be deeply embarrassing.
mhm,
It would be embarrassing for us to go back to the court.
mhm.
If we didn't have documents, it would be embarrassing going back to our client
Yeah.
to say the same. He didn't do any of that,
Mm.
right? His automatic reaction was, "Okay, let me help. Here are the documents. It's probably the ones you were going to use anyway. They're clean, make copies, right? And let's go ahead and take care of this, right? No drama, nothing." Um, that was in my career, the most significant, the most impactful example of professional kindness that I have ever experienced. Now he was still a hard charging lawyer and objected to every question I asked, right? I mean, that's not on offer, right? That's not going to happen. Um, right. But he taught me something really profoundly
Mm,
important. Grace is never a mistake, right? If you can show somebody grace, they would not have earned it. Maybe they did everything to squander it, to not deserve it, right? But if you can afford it, then you provide it. And I've always been deeply appreciative that he did that. Um, and again, it's these experiences that you're lucky enough to have that kind of teach you about a way of being in the world, um, what really matters, how to treat people, right? And then, the challenge is not forgetting it, right? As the saying goes, right? People don't need to be taught so much as they need to be reminded. But, that lesson was so impactful. I've never forgotten it. And, to this day, I remain really deeply grateful. It was a, partner at the old firm, LaBeouf Lamb named John Nona who did that. And like I said, he was a tough litigator, boy. He was tough, but he knew when he needed to be,
mhm,
right? I mean, I think he understood that I was a young lawyer, right? So he said, let me give this guy a break,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, I think the wisdom here is also not only experiencing something like that, but noticing it,
Yes,
appreciating it, and
yes, yes.
incorporating it into your life
Yeah, learn from it.
or from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. So, there are there are a lot of there are a lot of good stories from my time, at Cravath. But ultimately, and again, this in a conversation with a friend, the same friend who was, a year ahead of me, but at Harvard and who I went out to LA with, who was the best man at my wedding, and I was the best man at his wedding. Um, I remember sitting in my office one day, right? Again, it's one of the he was at Paul Weiss. He was at another one of the, these,
Yeah.
you know, nightmare.
Giants.
Yes, right. And so, he called me in the office today. We're just kind of commiserating about,
Commiserating.
how much of life we're missing because we're in the office all the time. And then he says to me something again that just changed the course of my life, which was he's like, Jamel, I don't know when you're gonna figure this out. It's like, well, figure what out? I said, it's like you are you're an academic. It's like you're a teacher and you're a scholar.
Mm.
And I don't know when you're gonna remember that. Right? It's just like, how long are you gonna stay at the firm? It's like, all through law school, you said, you didn't wanna do this, you didn't wanna do that, you just wanna go out and you wanna practice, it's like, and I listened to you. I didn't believe you, but you said all these things, right? And it's just like, but I'm just wondering now, it's like, when are you gonna remember who you actually are? Right?
Really?
Yeah, that's what he said. And I thought about it and I was like, I didn't have a reply. I didn't have a reply because he was right. And so, it was at that point that I started thinking about transitioning out of the firm, as good as they were to me. And, especially given how junior I was, the amazing level of responsibility that they were giving me, right? Taking depositions when, you know, some associate would have to wait 3, 4, 5 years to defend a deposition, let alone take one, right? Being told to negotiate settlement agreements on my own against partners with 20, 25 years more experience at other large law firms, right? Things that are just crazy, right? For somebody who is that recent a graduate from law school, as good as they were to me, right? I felt that I'd be doing myself a disservice and I would be doing them a disservice, right? If I couldn't fully commit to the opportunity they were presenting me with because it wasn't the right fit.
Mm,
And, another buddy of mine from law school, right, one of these wonderful, amazing people, that I met there, Michael Morley. I'll give Michael Morley a shout out, because he is now a professor himself at Florida State University, right? And like my other friend Charles Williams, who, told me, "Wake up," right? Michael presented me with a wonderful opportunity. He was clerking on the federal appellate court, and I was describing to him, you know, like, I think that, maybe the firm isn't the right fit and maybe I'll, wanna look, for other opportunities. It's like, "Well, do you wanna clerk?" right? And I said, I would definitely consider that. Yeah. So he said, okay, let me call you back. He hangs up. About an hour later, he calls me again. I'm in the office because where else would I be, right? He calls me an hour later and he says, my judge wants to meet you. And I was like, wait, what? It's like, he wants to meet you now. I was like, I was like, well, you're in Florida. It's like, I can't just take a cab, right? He's just like, look, you need to get down here. It's like, he
Really?
wants to meet you, right? All right. And this is like a very, very, very well-known federal appellate judge.
Judge Gerald
Tjoflat.
Tjoflat.
Yeah, that's right. Gerald Tjoflat, right? A gentleman and a scholar, one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. And so my friend Michael was just like, yeah, I told him about you, and he wants to meet you. So how soon can you get down here?
Oh.
So I said, okay, well, let me rearrange some stuff. So a little bit later that week, I was able to get on a plane, and go down and meet with the judge. And he basically he offered me a clerkship on the spot. And that was the way that I was able to transition out of the firm. And although I wanted to go, like I said, I listened to what my friend Charles has said, and I wanted to go into the academy, but I wasn't sure exactly how to go about doing it.
Hmm.
So I was thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll definitely do this clerkship. Maybe I'll go to another firm, and then maybe from there I'll figure out how to do it.
Hmm.
But I got opportunities, during my clerkship, to enter the academy more quickly, right? Because that's how I got the fellowship at the University of Chicago, that I did right before coming to the University of Illinois. And so all of these things, right? It's like, the people right? How they take care of you, right? The grace that they show you, right? And being just smart enough
Just smart enough to listen to them.
to listen
I
to
like
them,
that.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's I've been really really fortunate. I mean, I don't know how else to put it.
Well, you were also open to these adventures and you took them with
Yeah,
with an open heart.
yeah,
And
because
these
the
are not
because
trivial.
because the clerkship was in Jacksonville, Florida,
Yeah,
right? I'd
like
never
away from your home.
totally different part of the country, totally different culture. Um, but again, it's kind of like the spirit of adventure. And luckily, right, Nicola was game to do that. She was doing very, very well at her firm,
Hmm.
but she was open to trying something new. And so, we resigned from our firms. We took a few weeks off, and then we moved down to Jacksonville for the year.
Then you landed right here in
Mhm.
2008.
Best professional decision I ever made.
Really?
Yes, yes.
Why?
Um, because the U of I and the law school in particular, it combined all of the things that I value, uh, in a professional environment, right? Incredibly smart people who work hard, people who love ideas for their own sake,
Hmm.
people who want to make a real impact in the world, and are incredibly nice, right?
They are incredibly nice.
Yeah,
Really.
yeah. I mean, you know, um, it had the combination. It's not just the combination of all the things that I've come to value, but the magnitude, uh, of each of those things, right? At least in my own professional experience, makes the U of I unique. Um, where people believe in community, they believe in, um, learning from one another, from treating each other well. Um, in addition to the intellectual incisiveness.
Hmm.
It's been a fabulous. I am fortunate, right? I feel like I've had a fabulous career here,
Yes.
right? And it's as with most things, it's the people, that I'm lucky to be around, who have been able to give that to me. Um, and so, when I had the opportunity to lead the law school, I felt very lucky,
Hmm.
right? Because this is a place that I've come to care very deeply about. Um, and, I believe in our greatness. No doubt in my mind about how great an institution the law school is and the university. We fall to a large extent outside of the gaze of the media powers
Mhm.
in the United States on, the East Coast or on the West Coast. And obviously we're, a couple of hours south of Chicago, right? And so, unlike some other places, where merely going to the restroom is worthy of a front page story above the fold, right? We do a lot of the wonderful things that we do, outside of the media's attention. And there's also the Midwestern nice, right? It's like we're
Yeah.
really good at a lot of things, world class, in fact, but we don't brag, right? So, part of that is our location, part of it is the culture that's developed at this university over the course of its history. Um, you know, uh, it's you know, it encapsulates so many of the things that, I value and I
Yeah.
think are good models for how people should live their lives,
Mhm.
professionally and personally. So yeah, it's been an amazing, place to build a career, and I feel very fortunate that I've had that have the chance to do that.
You received more than 20 teaching awards over the
Yeah,
years.
rated as excellent. Yeah,
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 yes.
right. Yeah.
How do you view your teaching philosophy?
Oh yeah. So this is born out of an experience that I had as a student, where, like I had mentioned, right, my undergraduate professors were absolutely incredible, right? Like, especially in the English department, like to a person, right? We're all just amazing. And that influenced me some, but I would say what influenced me more, right, is a different experience that I had where I took a class. And, unfortunately, my sense was that the professor wasn't very invested
Mhm.
in the students.
Mm.
And, by virtue of having that experience, I said to myself, you know, and again, this is at a time when I wasn't contemplating being in the academy. But I said, if I ever had the opportunity to teach anything, right, I would make sure that I would never engage with my students the way that this professor is engaging with us.
Mm.
I'll never do that. Right? Every person in my class is important to me, right? They have, and it might seem, overly sentimental to say it like this, but I believe this, right? They are people who are loved. They're people who love them. There are people out there who are thinking about them and hoping that their day goes well. It's important to them that they do well, and it might be that, you know, the extra word or of encouragement. Uh, it might be the harsh word I say to them for the purposes of forcing them to do better. That might be the thing that changes their day, changes their week, changes their career.
Mhm.
And so, when I engage with students, that's the frame from which I'm, that from which I'm coming, right?
Mhm.
Um, you know, I think I had mentioned to you in a prior conversation, right? My custom is something I started doing not when I was at Chicago, but once I started here, right? Is that I say a very quick prayer before going into the classroom. And the quick prayer is just this. I hope to be a blessing to my students today. That's it, right?
Love it.
Um, and so, it's making sure that the standards are high, but also that the students understand I am holding them to a high standard because I care about what happens to them,
Mhm.
right? I care that they are strong so that when they go out into the world as lawyers, they can be strong for other people,
Mhm.
right? I care, right, that, you know, the experience of law school is hard,
Yes.
and I care not to make it any harder than it has to be.
Mhm.
And so it's just being really mindful about what we're all doing here, right? Law is a tough business. And so, we got to teach people, right, to be prepared, to be armed, right? Because there are folks who are going to be coming, right, to our graduates, um, at the worst moments of their lives.
Mhm.
And the only people who are gonna be able to help them is that person who is sitting in my class right now. And I have to make sure to the extent that I can, right? And my colleagues feel the same way, to the extent that we can to make sure that that was the right choice. They came to you and that was the right choice, right? But the humanness has to be preserved, right? My philosophy, which admittedly I got from a cartoon, is
Really?
I did is first the heart, then the head,
Uh-huh.
right? You got to show people that you care, and once they know that you care, you have their trust, and once you have their
Mhm.
trust, then you can serve them.
I see. I see. Which cartoon? I'm just curious.
Bluey,
Bluey?
yeah, do you familiar with that one?
I haven't watched
It's
it,
an
but
Australian cartoon, I believe.
it's a cattle dog.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
So
Australian cattle dog. Yeah, 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 yeah.
you are familiar with this one.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and so there was an episode, my triplets, I have triplet daughters, they loved the show. I think that they are now a little old for it. They're 11. But, there was an episode where the husband was trying to teach the girls, his daughters, how to play chess, and they were frankly more interested in eating the pieces than they were in learning the rules of the game, and so he was getting frustrated, and so, his wife, their mother, says that to him, right? First the heart, then the head, right? It's like at that age, the thing that they need to learn is to care for people and learn how to be cared about. That's the thing that they need to learn right now. If we get that right, then all of the other harder lessons like learning chess, those will come in time. And I think that's true not only in that context, but I think it's true in many contexts,
Mhm.
right? It's
Yes,
like,
I
you
agree
show
with you.
right? You show empathy, caring, interest in people.
Mhm.
Um, you know, you build a relationship. Once you have a relationship, there's so many things that you can accomplish together, right? And I think that's true in life. I think that's true in law. I think it's true in the academy. I remember, to this point, when I was clerking for Judge Tjoflat, he said something to the clerks. He said, "Look, he's like, you know how you can tell if a community, is in really good shape?" Say, "Well, how, Judge?" He's like, "You go into a law partner's office. There are very few law books on the shelf. You don't need rules because people trust each other. And when somebody gives you their word, you know that you can rely on it. It's when trust is broken down and people you can't rely on one another's word. They can't rely on, the people talking to them, being honest with them, that you need all of these rules
Mm.
that then need to get enforced to
Mhm.
make people do the right thing.
Mhm.
That's how you know,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
It's building relationships with people, right? And, a good way to do that, right, is to show that you care. You care about what happens to them. So, in a former life, when I was the associate dean for academic affairs, right, several years ago, I would have to, as part of my responsibilities, I would have to discipline students.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I would say to them is like, look, right, I'm going to have to do some things that you're going to regard as bad things, right? Because, we have the evidence, right? We've established facts by virtue of reviewing that evidence. And so those facts constitute the following infractions.
Mhm.
And so I have a responsibility now. I got to enforce the rules. But here's what I'm going to tell you. I am not going to enforce the rules against you any more than I have to,
Mhm.
right? Because you now owe a debt to the community by virtue of these
Mhm.
transgressions,
Mhm.
right? But I'm going to show you an element of grace. There are things that within our discretion that we could do, and I'm not going to do them,
Mhm.
right? Because I'm going to trust that you will learn from this.
Yes.
And so more punitive measures, though available, are unnecessary,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely. You give them the maximum benefit of the doubt and the minimum necessary punishment for them to just realize. And I think it's an exercise in forgiveness, so to
It
speak.
is.
And I'm completely on board with that.
Yeah. But forgiveness, in my view, is a contract,
Mm.
right? If somebody shows you grace and they forgive you, part of accepting that, because you can't earn it, but part of accepting it and being worthy of it is resolving never to do this thing again,
Yes.
right? And so, how I would approach somebody who has one, transgression is different than a serial transgressor,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Especially for that first time, right? Give people a chance to recover from it if the context permits it, right? There are some things where the context doesn't permit it, right? This has to be a one and done. But for the most part,
Mhm.
right? Relationships, community, trust, right? Heart.
Mind. Are you ready for our rapid Eddie style random questions?
Um, Probably not, but we're gonna do it anyway.
I know that you are a big fan of the Yankees and the New York Knicks.
Yeah, for better or worse, mostly worse, but yes.
So yeah, they haven't been winning too many championships lately,
They
to
haven't.
put it mildly. So if you could choose one team to win the championship next season, who would you grant it to?
It's gotta be the Knicks. I mean,
Really?
the Knicks have not won the NBA championship in my lifetime, right? So it's 1973 was the last time they've gotten relatively close, um, but, they've never been able to finish it off. Thank you for that, Michael Jordan. So it would have to be it's easily the now, if I were a football fan, I would say the Giants or the Jets, but, I'm not an idiot. I know a lost cause when I see it, so it's really just the Knicks is my answer.
Okay. What is your favorite holiday?
Uh, it's Christmas.
Christmas.
It's easy one. Yeah.
Mine's too,
Yeah,
right? Isn't that
yes.
easy? An easy
Yeah,
one?
it is an easy one.
What type of music do you enjoy?
Well, I, um I am a, hip hop R&B guy.
Mm.
And, particularly 90s hip hop and R&B. Look, I mean, this is not a popular
Tupac?
uh to some extent, but I
Okay.
would say it's more for me Mary J. Blige. It's Tribe Called Quest. It's Nas. Illmatic is still the best. I know that this is a controversial, but Illmatic is still the best, rap album ever made in my
Mhm.
view. Eric B and Rakim, right? So that's kind of the era
Yeah.
that I come out of, right? If people really wanted to kind of, go a little bit more in depth, Guy, for those of you who remember Guy, I love their music from the late 80s and early 90s. And so yeah, that's kind of the sweet spot for me.
Now, when technology allows it,
Mhm.
and if you know it's safe,
Yeah.
would you ever consider flying to space or to the moon?
Despite what my daughters would say. My son, he would be fine with me taking the trip, I assure you. But my daughters, as they said when they were very, very young, shortly after they started talking, my son had indicated that he might want to go to space because he had been to a planetarium, and their reaction to that was horror. They said, "Right, why would you do that? Space is dangerous." And so, I wouldn't mind going, but I don't know that I would be able to get out my front door because they would probably prevent me from doing so. I don't think their views on that have changed, right?
Yeah.
Space is inherently dangerous.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Right.
Right. But yes, if it were just up to me,
You would.
oh, absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely, I would.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely, no question.
Absolute no question?
No, you're saying if it's safe, of course I
Yeah.
would go.
Would go to the moon.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I am I'm a Star Trek fan. I
Mhm.
believe that that's our rightful destiny is among the stars. So yes, of course I would go.
I agree with you.
Yeah,
I would go too.
yeah.
Now you grew up in New York and now you're in Champaign. And it's a small town. Do you ever miss New York City?
Nope,
Really?
no, not at all. What I tell folks, part of the reason that my wife and I left New York, in addition to wanting to move on and do some different things professionally, the pace of life was um, was grueling. I mean, a lot of it was, again, she's working 100 hours a week at the firm. I'm working 100 hours a week at the firm. So that was definitely part of it. But even outside of that, right, the pace of life. was a little bit more, and I had had enough of that, right? I basically had that my whole life, with the exception of the 3 years, and it's not even 3 whole years, right? Because it's just 3 academic years that I was in law school, and I was even then I was only in Connecticut, right? It's like it's not
Right.
like I was that far away. We were looking for a downshift in the day to day. And so, we certainly got that once we left there. We got it in Jacksonville, we got it in Chicago, and we got it here. What I tell people is I can get everything that I need from New York in a long weekend, right?
I
It's like
see.
I can fly in on a Thursday night, I can leave on a Sunday afternoon, and I get all the living I need to do in
Yeah.
between, right? Right? And then I can leave it there for the folks who want to live there, right?
Yeah.
See you next year. So no,
Yeah.
I would not.
Pricing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, there are folks who are like, we'll never, leave New York. Obviously that wasn't me.
Mm.
So
So for closing,
yeah.
we started at level 0, and now you are the 14th dean of the
Mhm.
law school. How do you see the next chapter?
So for me, look, the only thing at this point that I am interested in being is useful. And so, my focus is really on, trying to lead the law school in a way that is beneficial for everybody who is lucky enough to work and study there. And, there are things that we're trying to do at the law school, right, to really make it, one of, if not the preeminent public law schools in the country. And that really is the goal. That's the ambition. But, for myself, I'm trying to take it day to day. I take the opportunities as they present themselves. I think that from, the course of my life, one thing that you can't say looking at, where I've been and what I've done is that a whole lot of forethought and planning went into any of it, right? That's the one thing you can't say, right? It's like you can say a lot of other things, some positive, some negative, but it can't say that. And so, I am now just focused on, doing well for the people who have put their faith in me. And, I consider that a privilege. And so, I pour all of my, energy into that. And then obviously, what I tell people, because often when people identify themselves, they identify themselves by their profession,
Right.
right? Uh, I identify myself as a husband and a father
Mm.
first, right? And then I say law professor, dean, whatever. And so,
Mm.
making sure, that my home life is strong and that it's good, right, is the priority. And then, a second, perhaps a close second, right, is making sure, that, my energies are poured into making the law school, the best place for everybody who's a part of the community, that I can make it. Um, and so, you know, I don't have plans to to go anywhere.
Mhm.
Something may come along in a few years, that's interesting. But to be honest, I have gotten farther in life than I ever expected I could,
Mhm.
right? I'm already there.
Yes.
And so,
You can relax a little bit now.
yeah, I mean, I don't feel like I need to go looking for the next thing.
Right.
Because, I've been really lucky
Mhm.
in the life that I've been allowed to have, through hard work, through luck, through mentorship, and through grace. So, you know, I'm good where I am. Right? Right, to be blunt, yeah.
Dean Sharpe, it was really a pleasure
Oh,
talking
it
to you
was it
today.
was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
I really, really appreciate
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
generous time.
Oh, of course. Thank you.
Thank you.